Pecharunt is the flagship mythical of the Indigo Disc DLC, and it has had a pretty strange story in competitive Pokemon. While some players saw potential in its monstrous 160 base defense, good speed tier, and especially its signature ability Poison Puppeteer, combined with new move Malignant Chain, it pretty quickly fell out of favor with the OU player base due to its perceived inconsistency, and Pecharunt found itself dropping to UU early on in its lifespan. From there, while it would make occasional ventures into OU tournament play, it was generally regarded as a noob trap, a Pokemon that would trick inexperienced players into believing it may have more potential than it had in practice. Recently, though, Pecharunt found itself not just finding a legitimate high-level niche in OU, but actually rising to the tier via usage, and some players have even started calling for it to be banned. The OU Council released a thread discussing Pecharunt and if it should be banned or not. So what happened to put this UU caliber Pokemon on the OU ban radar? Some of Pecharunt's first notable uses were in the World Cup of Pokemon, where we can see Shiloh of US West bringing a Pecharunt Rain team built by Vert against Conflict of the German team. In a moment of unexpected foreshadowing, we can see Pecharunt not only get an early parting shot off on King Gambit and successfully force out a Dragonair's Roaring Moon, but we also see it get a crucial Toxic off on Iron Valiant after living a Terra Ghost Shadow Ball. This eventually causes the Iron Valiant to knock itself out in confusion, allowing Shiloh's Iron Treads to get Stealth Rocks up and letting his Zamazenta muscle through Lander's Therian to win the game. Here, we can see some of Pecharunt's great traits start to reveal itself, letting us understand why it has started to rise to such prominence. Pecharunt's stat spread may seem somewhat unimpressive at first, but a closer look reveals that they're actually perfect for its role as a spin blocker, disruptor, and general nuisance. Pecharunt is just fast enough to outspeed Great Tusk, while still having the bulk to take on its powerful Headlong Rush, making it a fantastic spin blocker. That Poison and Ghost typing and fantastic physical bulk also come in handy against powerful threats like Iron Valiant, Ogerpon Wellspring, and especially Zamazenta, which Pecharunt is the closest thing OU has to a real hard counter. Though its defensive applications are undeniable, what really makes Pecharunt controversial in OU right now is the combination of its signature move Malignant Chain and its signature ability, Poison Puppeteer. Malignant Chain is a 100 base power poison type move, which already makes it somewhat threatening off of Pecharunt's decent special attack. But what really drives it over the edge is the 50% chance to badly poison the target. Combined with Poison Puppeteer, which confuses any Pokemon that Pecharunt poisons, you can essentially hit most opponents with a double whammy of status, putting them on a timer with Toxic Poison and giving them the chance to hit themselves in confusion and give you a free turn. While these good traits always existed, Vert was one of the first builders and players to really start capitalizing on them, giving Pecharunt its first push towards viability. Pecharunt's real breakout tour was the Smogon Champions League, where players like Langloi, Nico, and Helam started to recognize these excellent traits as well, and Pecharunt started not only getting games under its belt, but well-deserved wins. This is when the player base en masse started to realize Pecharunt not only had a niche, but that it was one worth taking advantage of even at a top level. By the time Smogon Premier League rolled around, Pecharunt has started a lightning-fast ascent to viability, with more and more players recognizing those good traits and bringing it both to tournament games and on the Pokemon Showdown ladder. This eventually led to Pecharunt to officially rise to the OU tier and become a staple of ladder and tournament play alike, with a shocking 11% usage rate in January 2025. Players appreciated its great synergy with already fantastic Pokemon like King Gambit and Tinglu, as it could reliably pivot them in while checking their counters like Iron Valiant and Zamazenta. Malignant Chain and Recover are near mandatory moves on Pecharunt, but from there, players have a little bit of leeway. The most common and viable third and fourth moves are Parting Shot and Hex for pivoting and powerful Ghost-type stab, respectively, but you occasionally see players spec into some other options. The combination of Shadow Ball, Nasty Plot, and Terra Blast Ground or Fighting is occasionally seen on the latter, turning Pecharunt into a more immediate threat that can threaten opposing Dark types like King Gambit and Tinglu. The most viable Terra types, however, are by far Ghost and Dark. Ghost removes its ground weakness and boosts the power of Hex while still blocking Rapid Spin, while Dark is useful to turn your weaknesses to Dark, Ghost, and Psychic into 2 resistances and an immunity, respectively. Terra Dark is also notable for boosting Foul Play, an increasingly common move on Pecharunt for its ability to threaten high-attack foes like Lander's Therian, and even resistant targets like King Gambit, Roaring Moon, and Weavile attempting to set up on Pecharunt. Not all was good for Pecharunt, though, as many people started to get fed up with its near-on-kill ability, and especially the hacks potential it creates with its poison and confusion strats. In this Smogon Champions League game between Ima and ACR1, we can see exactly that. Ima is in a very dire position by turn 10, their team having been worn down quickly by ACR1's powerful offense. 4 of their 6 Pokemon have already fainted, and they've already used their Terra on Tornadus Therian. From what should be a lost position though, Pecharunt comes in on ACR1's Moltres. After getting the Malignant Chain Poison and a Confusion, Moltres is forced out and ACR1's Hisuian Samurott comes out. Here, Ima clicks Parting Shot on the Sucker Punch and is able to bring in their Great Tusk to set Stealth Rock, ensuring that the 1 HP Hisuian Samurott can never come back in after it switches out. Pecharunt comes back in on the Moltres, and the 2 Pokemon trade hits until Moltres eventually falls to poison damage. From there, the same cycle repeats with both Zamazenta and Kyurem, with Pecharunt surviving even their boosted hits, poisoning and confusing them, and eventually stalling out the poison damage until, against all odds, Ima wins the battle. This battle exemplifies the issue a lot of people have with Pecharunt. Even though it isn't too powerful in its own right, many players find the roulette wheel of Malignant Chain and Confusion uncompetitive. Pecharunt has been known to end up 1v1ing Pokemon it otherwise has no right beating, like Tinglu and Great Tusk, with its combination of steadily increasing poison damage and the chance for self-hits with Confusion. While its defensive merit in checking threats like Zamazenta, Ogerpon Wellspring, and Iron Valiant is undoubtedly valuable, is it outweighed by the hack's potential it brings? To try and get some insight on what the community thinks and what the future of Pecharunt in the tier looks like, we reached out to some members of the OU Council for their thoughts. What does the OU player base think at large about Pecharunt right now? Is it seen as a generally good presence in the tier, or do a lot of players want to see it gone? Do you think Pecharunt is ban-worthy? Or is something else going on to bring it all this negative attention? What are the top players and builders doing to respond to Pecharunt during the middle of SPL? As a council member, is a suspect test in the cards right now?
This is a great question. At first, we didn't really know. When we were initially discussing what the general consensus on Pecharunt was, we were considering its SPL performance and also the few write-ins it received. To further understand what people thought about Pecharunt in more detail, given these developments, we opened up the discussion in our Open Mic Council Minutes Ask thread so users had the opportunity to voice their detailed opinions on Pecharunt. Overall, a vast majority of players didn't really view it as a particularly ban-worthy Pokemon. The primary argument around banning it centered around Malignant Chain and Poison Puppeteer, which are very RNG-centric. Many people in the thread mentioned that its style of RNG is not too far off from abilities like Flame Body or Static, or moves like Thunder Wave, where there's layered RNG involved, that can be game-deciding but aren't fundamentally demanding to account for. Given that Pecharunt is reliant on Poison to actually roll the dice and actually make meaningful progress, running Pokemon or Terra types that are immune to it is actually a pretty easy go-to. This is especially true if teams have tools into Parting Shot recipients, which they typically do thanks to Status, Encore, and phasing moves like Roar and Whirlwind being near omnipresent and naturally impeding setup opportunities. A lot of people mentioned that Pecharunt is overall appreciated for its incredible physical bulk being a great means to check many physical attacking Pokemon like Ogerpon Wellspring, Dragon Dance Kyurem, and Dragonite. These Pokemon, among others, are notoriously hard to compress answers for. Furthermore, its access to reliable status, foul play, and their synergy with Terra really help accentuate how useful its fundamentals are in a format where the power level is the highest it's ever been. To me, it makes a lot of sense why people err closer to its presence being positive in spite of how annoying it has the potential to be.
Right now, we're seeing a huge win rate and an increasing usage rate for the Pokemon that put major pressure on the Pecharunt and Tinglu core. Those two seem really tough to take down on paper because Pecharunt can check most physical attackers and Tinglu can check most special attackers, but nearly is a very key word. Some major threats to the core, offensively, are Kyurem, Weavile, Low Kick Kingambit, and various Iron Valiant sets like Calm Mind Shadow Ball or Swords Dance Knockoff, all of which are picking up in usage. Players are also bringing Pokemon that can take advantage of Pecharunt for free turns. This comes primarily in the form of toxic immune Pokemon like Kingambit, Goldengo, Garganicle, and Poison Heal Gliscor. These Pokemon don't always immediately threaten Tinglu, or other common Pecharunt partners like Great Tusk, Gliscor, and Zamazenta, but they can break apart common sequences that Pecharunt would love to cycle through otherwise. Terra Steel and Terra Poison are also seeing more usage, particularly on Pokemon that can immediately threaten ground types that they otherwise would have a new weakness to. Terra Poison Darkrai is a classic example, which can Ice Beam through Great Tusk and Gliscor and use its new Stab Sludge Bomb to get through Primarina, but we've also seen it on Clefable and Hydrapple. As for Terra Steel, Latios has been picking up in usage, and it can make good use of the typing defensively, not only against Pecharunt and Ting-Lu, but also against Kyurem, which would otherwise heavily threaten it with an Ice Beam. Finally, we've got to give a mention to Clear Amulet. VGC players see this item every other game, but if you're a singles player and you've never even heard of it, don't feel too bad. Most of us hadn't either. The reason Clear Amulet is so scary for Pecharunt is because it will make Parting Shot fail entirely. It's not just a case of Pecharunt not being able to drop the opposing Pokemon's stats, it also won't be allowed to switch. Picture this. You send out your Pecharunt against the King Gambit, as the King Gambit clicks Swords Dance. You want to use Parting Shot to lower its attack stat so that you can bring in your Great Tusk a bit safer. So you click Parting Shot, and suddenly, that King Gambit Swords Dances again, and you've done absolutely nothing with your turn. There isn't a whole lot that's scarier. As of right now, we've only seen this item on King Gambit, but who knows what else we'll see it on. It seems like a viable option on Scizor, Dragonite, and even Hisui and Samurott.
I personally don't think so. While I think it definitely deserves the discussion, I align the most with the do not ban arguments. I feel its RNG-based elements are not only maneuverable given how many poison immunities naturally exist in the tier, but also that Parting Shot's relationship with poison switch-ins is not as strained as you'd expect. You have to consider just how much it relies on being able to land its poison when it comes to winning some 1v1s, and how poison immunities actually impede it from successfully making progress. This can force it into clicking Parting Shot more often, which can be exploited or mid-grounded effectively when accounted for. When you consider items like Clear Amulet, the existence of Pokemon like Gholdengo that can also block Parting Shot, and the fact Parting Shot can't make progress, its predictability can become a burden. As for why it's been gaining negative attention, I feel like recently there's been a huge uptick in people pushing for action on potentially uncompetitive/unhealthy elements, in part to Machamp's recent DPP-OU suspect test and the push against Terra Blast. While I agree with both of these actions, I feel as though this has the potential to be a slippery slope. I know that's bold of me of all people to say, but it's true. RNG management is a part of the game that we play, and some RNG can be managed more consistently than others given the reliability and splashability of Counterplay. There's a difference between disruptive adaptations and healthy adaptations, and it all comes down to if these adaptations are consistent and serve other purposes in the metagame. Given that Pecharunt's gambling addiction has Counterplay that's not incredibly demanding, given our surplus of poison immunities and how heavily that punishes its game plan, I think it falls into the latter camp. In turn, it provides an incredibly useful Pokemon to the tier that gives players an instrumental tool into a metagame where offense is notoriously difficult to fully prepare for.
I would say that as of right now, there is no real chance that Pecharunt gets a suspect test in the near future. While we're always looking to stay on top of anything that could be deemed problematic, Pecharunt currently just doesn't fit that category. It's drawn some ire from the council, and of course from the player base, but overall, it seems like most players don't view Pecharunt as anything problematic. Don't get me wrong. Everyone's had a game or two taken over by Poison Puppeteer shenanigans, but the math on Pecharunt makes it less dominant than it can seem in your head, and more often than not it just acts as a good, but not broken, pivot and utility check to Dragon Dance sweepers, which most players view as a good thing. We'll be continuing to monitor its presence, of course. A meteoric rise like this is nearly unheard of, and could easily be a sign of a problematic element. Pecharunt is pretty likely to find its way onto future surveys, but as of right now, there won't be a suspect test unless player sentiment shifts.
I'd like to thank Ausma and Lily for joining us for this. This kind of transparency and insight is highly appreciated, especially with a Pokemon as controversial as Pecharunt. Though it isn't likely to get a suspect test, it's good to know your eyes are on it. What do you think about Pecharunt and overuse right now? Do you think it has earned its place in the metagame, and that the defensive value it brings outweighs the bad, or do you think that the roulette game it can force teams to play is too uncompetitive? Is rising counterplay like Clear Amulet enough to counteract these negative traits? Feel free to discuss Pecharunt and the future it has in the tier in the comments below, or in the OU discussion thread on Smogon, which you can find linked in the description. If you made it to the end of this video, you're most likely interested in competitive. If you'd like to see more videos like this alongside tournament coverage and highlights of our best games, be sure to subscribe here. You can also find us over on Twitch at SmogonU with live tournament coverage every Sunday. To see other Pokemon spotlights, you can also keep up with us on these social media sites, and of course, the Smogon forums themselves. That's all for today. I've been Ming549, and this has been Smogon University. We hope to see you around. Peace.